In this video, we're going to talk about the imaginary number I. Now, I means the imaginary number. Okay. Now, when we talk about complex numbers, we often deal with the imaginary number I. Now, where does I comes from? I comes from I squared, and I squared is equal to minus 1. When we make I the subject, we take square root on both sides, so I becomes root of minus 1. So these two things we should know, that I squared is equal to minus 1, and when we take the square root of I squared, we have to take both sides, so we cancel the square with the square root. We have I is equal to root of minus 1. So basically the value of I is this, right? And where this came from is from here, right? Okay, now we should ask ourselves, why do we study the imaginary number I? Now this becomes very useful when we evaluate roots of a negative number. Root of a negative number, we have learned in our early stages of mathematics that root of a negative number is not possible, right? We say it is undefined when we take root of any negative number, right? When you press in our calculator, it comes to undefined, right? But when we study in complex numbers, we say that root of a negative number is possible when we introduce the letter I, or the imaginary number I. And in this video we are going to evaluate some negative roots, and we are going to see how the imaginary number I becomes useful. Okay, so please note that the value of I is equal to root of negative 1, right? And throughout this video we are going to use this. Okay, let's do an example, and let's see if we can use the imaginary number I. Okay, so we have a negative root here. If we press this in calculator, we will have something as undefined, right? Our fx calculator gives answer for root of negative 4 as undefined, right? Now if we introduce the letter I, we can make that possible. Okay, so please note that I is equal to the root of negative 1. Now this root of negative 4, we are going to dissociate it, right? And we are going to write as factors. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I will take the square root of 4 times negative 1. Now square root of negative 4 can also be written this way, because 4 times negative 1 will give me negative 4. Okay, now from here we are going to use some laws of surds, right? Laws of surds says when we have a square root of a times b, this can be written as single roots, root of a times root of b. Okay, so we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to apply this rule. So that means square root of 4 times the square root of negative 1. Now square root of positive 4 is possible. We know square root of 4 is a plus and minus of 2, and the square root of negative 1, we can use this logic here. Square root of negative 1 is I, so our answer here will be 2i. Okay, let's do this one. square root of negative 16. So again our value of I is root of negative 1. Okay, now we can write negative root of 16 as the square root of 16 times negative 1. 16 times negative 1 will give me negative 16, right? Again use the laws of surds, where you have root of a times b, that is same as root of a times root of b. So that means this can be written as the square root of 16 times the square root of negative 1. Now square root of 16 we know is plus and minus 4. 4 squared will give me 16, or negative 4 squared will give me also 16. And the value of root of negative 1 can be taken from here. Root of negative 1 is I. So again we were able to find the square root of negative 16. Let's do some other example and see. Okay, we have root of negative 9. So again very quickly, I is equal to root of minus 1. Okay, and square root of negative 9 can be written as the square root of 9 times negative 1. And applying some rules of surds, we have root of a times b, that is same as root of a times root of b. So that means we have square root of 9 times the square root of negative 1. And square root of 9 we know that it is plus and minus 3, because when you square 3 you will get 9. And root of minus 1 we already know it is I. So we are going to replace root of negative 1 with I. So all this is replaced with I. So we'll have 3I. So that is how the negative number can be evaluated. Okay, let's do one example, another one, and see what we can do here. Okay, this time we have a square root of negative 12. Okay, so again we can write this as I is equal to minus square root of minus 1. Okay, now this can be written as the square root of 12 times negative 1. Right? So applying the rule again, square root of a times b is same as square root of a times square root of b. That means this can be written as a root of 12 times root of negative 1. Okay, now root of 12 will be a surd. Okay, root of 12 is a surd. You cannot take root of 12 as a whole number or as an integer. If you take root of 12, it won't be an integer value, right? Because root of 12 is a surd. Now we can further simplify this surd. Okay, we can further simplify this surd here, this part here, root of 12. We can say root of 4 times 3, right? This will take care of root of 12, and this times root of negative 1 is still there. Okay, now this one we can apply the same rule here. This rule can be applied here again. So this time we will have root of 4 times root of 3, and then of course we have our main boy here, root of -1. Now we know root of 4 will be plus or minus 2, right? And then we have root of 3, right? And this will be replaced by I. So we'll have I here. So that means the square root of -12 is same as plus or minus 2 root of 3I. Okay. So this is how the imaginary number I works. So our conclusion would be, why we study the imaginary number I is to evaluate root of a negative number.